Welcome back. Hoping to open the world of oysters to more New Yorkers, one man created a portable seafood service called the Real Mother Shuckers. Owner and founder of the Real Mother Shuckers, Moody, joins me for a discussion on his street vendor seafood business. Moody, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, before we talk a little bit more about your business, can you actually tell me just a little bit about yourself and how you actually got started in the food industry?
Yeah, so I got started in the food industry, working on a sustainable living community in Louisiana, and that was my first experience, like professionally cooking, I guess you could say. After that, I moved to Florida, where I was doing a few different types of fine dining places, different steakhouses and things of that nature. I was really intrigued by the culinary world and being able to step into some place and just go get work. So that was why I started doing food industry specifically. But then after that, after getting good at shucking oysters, I started working at a few places that did oysters specifically, and realizing that I wouldn't even have to be involved with the rest of the kitchen. I could just basically have my own lane by doing oysters. And then I started to really gain a respect for the oysters and wanted to expose people who I hadn't necessarily had a good experience with oysters themselves previously to what I was experiencing, which was that fine dining oysters can be very different than dollar happy hour oysters. That there are hundreds of different kinds of oysters, and that they all should be respected differently. So exposing people.
So, what actually inspired you to branch off and make your own food service and start Mothershuckers?
Really, it was a combination of wanting to expose people from uh, all backgrounds, all kinds of basically to removing it from just this fine dining experience and bringing it to the street was something that really was appealing to me because it has always kind of had a connotation of being like a stuffy environment or like at least a unapproachable environment unless you do make it to a dollar happy hour. I wanted to try to make it something where somebody could walk in off the street and get the same kind of oysters that they would get in steakhouse, but just from me off the street, basically.
And can you actually explain how you came in with the name? It's really fun to say and it's kind of cool. So, can you tell us how you came in with the name? And then for those who are unfamiliar, what is shucking?
So the name actually was kind of a dig. People used to just kind of say to me like, "Oh, you're a bad mother shucker." Whenever I would tell them that I shucked oysters, so it was like they were kind of like making fun of me. I felt like, but at the end of the day, I liked it. I was like, yeah, I am a bad mother shucker. I own it, and take it and kind of run with it a little bit because it's fun. It sounds funny, it makes me laugh. So even though it was kind of a joke on me at first, now
Now,
that's my thing.
so I understand part of the inspiration also stemmed from Black history with oysters. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So in New York City specifically, uh, there was a very large amount of oysters here that were what was some of the initial economy that we had when we were creating New York City. And a lot of the oystering itself was done by Black people. Specifically, there was an area in Staten Island that was called Sandy Grounds. That was all Black. It was one of the largest all Black communities inside of the United States. And then there was one specific person named Thomas Downing, who's actually the person who kind of turned oysters from a common person's food into like a finer dining type of food, and to elevate the food into being cooked in all sorts of different types of ways. Thomas Downing was somebody who was so important during his time period that when he passed away, that they literally shut down the stock market that was or the exchange, the stock exchange, or whatever it was, the banking systems for that day to honor him because of how much of a financial impact that he had on the city at his time period. But there was tons of black people that were creating inroads through oystering from New York all the way to the Chesapeake. Black people have a we kind of have a history of removing ourselves from the narrative when it comes to the maritime. But in essence, we were oystering, we were whaling, we were on the water the entire time. And so it's just interesting to be able to bring that back to life.
So I also wanted to talk about something that I think is super interesting. Mothershuckers, along with more than 75 purveyors in New York City, will donate all the shells to the Billion Oyster Project, an initiative to restore 1 billion oysters to the New York harbor by 2035. Can you tell me a little bit more about your efforts to revive oyster reefs?
Yes, so oyster shells actually are what is necessary to recreate oyster reefs themselves. Oysters rely on oyster shells for their young. So basically, the fact that we don't have any oyster shells inside the ocean anymore, there are no natural oyster beds or oyster reefs. In the early days when we first came to the coastlines of America, there were so many oyster shells, oyster mountains, basically oyster middens on the coastlines that we were utilizing the shells to do things like build asphalt and landfill and actually really kind of removing the shells that we already did have on the coastlines intentionally for what we thought would be more useful purposes. But in essence, the native people who were here on the coastlines during those time period, they understood that eating your oyster and then keeping the shell and transporting it back all the way to the coastline and dropping it there is important because the oysters themselves rely on the shells to repopulate the ocean floor. The
Um,
ocean represents, the oyster represents the forest of the ocean to a large extent. Seaweed and the oyster beds would be the reef. That would be where all of our small animal life inside the ocean would be coming from. And due to the fact that there is no oyster beds anymore, um, all of that life cycle is also
so bef-
regulated.
Before we let you go, can you just let everybody know how viewers can stay up to date with you and where they can actually find this oyster cart?
Yeah, so our oyster cart is Friday through Sunday at Industry City. Um, but the best thing that you can do is check us out on Instagram. So, like I was saying, we're at Industry City at the Sahadis at Industry City on Fridays through Sundays, 1 till 4 o'clock. But we also list all of the different other pop ups that we do on our Instagram, the Real Mother Shuckers. The best thing to do is really just check the Instagram for right now because there's a lot of different things that are in the works.
Hmm.
And we're always outside. So if you stay checking up on us, it shouldn't be too difficult for you to find us.
All right, Moody, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.